Well, friends and family, I'm back. Time for us to do Chapter 5, the Tesseract. Yes, Miss Witch said, he is behind the darkness so that even we cannot see him. Meg began to cry and to sob aloud. Through her tears, she could see Charles Wallace standing there, very small and very white. Calvin put his arms around her, but she shuddered and broke away, sobbing wildly. Then she was enfolded in the great wings of Miss Whatsit, and she felt comfort and strength pouring through her. Miss Whatsit was not speaking aloud, and yet through the wings, Meg understood her words. "My child," she said, "please do not despair. Do you think we would have brought you here if there were no hope? We are asking you to do a very difficult thing, though we are confident that you can do it. Your father needs help. He needs courage. And for his children, he may be able to do what he believes he cannot do for himself." "Now," Miss Witch said, "are we ready?" "Where are we going?" Calvin asked. Again, Meg felt an actual tingling of fear as Miss Witch spoke. "We must go behind the shadow." "But we will not do it all at once," Miss Whatsit comforted them. "We'll do it in short stages." She looked at Meg. "Now we Tesser. We will wrinkle again. Do you understand?" "No," Meg said flatly. Miss Whatsit sighed. "Explanations are not easy when they are about things for which your civilization still has no words. Calvin talked about traveling at the speed of light. Do you understand that, little Meg?" "Yes," Meg nodded. "That, of course, is the impractical and long way around. We have learned to take shortcuts wherever possible." "Sort of like in math," Meg said. "Like in math." Miss Whatsit looked at Mrs. Who. "Take your skirt and show them." "La experiencia es la madre de la ciencia." Spanish, my dears. Cervantes. Experience is the mother of knowledge. Miss Who took a portion of her white robe in her hands and held it tight. "You see," Miss Whatsit said, "if a very small insect were to move from the section of skirt in Mrs. Who's right hand to that in her left, it would be quite a long walk for him if he had to walk straight across." Swiftly, Mrs. Who brought her hands, still holding the skirt together. "Now, you see," Miss Whatsit said, "he would be there without that long trip. That is how we travel." Charles Wallace accepted the explanation serenely. Even Calvin did not seem perturbed. "Oh dear," Meg sighed. "I guess I am a moron. I just don't get it," she said. "That is because you think of space in only 3 dimensions," Miss Whatsit told her. "We travel in the 5th dimension. This is something you can understand, Meg. Don't be afraid to try. Was your mother able to explain a tesseract to you?" "Well," Meg said, "she never did. She got so upset about it." "Why, Miss Whatsit?" "She said it had something to do with her and father." "It was a concept they were playing with," Miss Whatsit answered, "going beyond the 5th dimension to the fifth. Going beyond the 4th dimension into the 5th. Did your mother explain it to you, Charles?" "Well, yes." Charles looked a little embarrassed. "Please don't be hurt, Meg. I just kept at her while you were at school till I got it out of her." Meg sighed. "Just explain it to me." "Okay," Charles said. "What is the 1st dimension?" "Well, a line." "Okay. And the 2nd dimension?" "Well, you square the line. A flat square would be in the 2nd dimension. And the 3rd?" "Well, you'd square the 2nd dimension, then the square wouldn't be flat anymore, and it would have a bottom and sides and a top." "And the 4th dimension?" "Well, I guess if you want to put it in mathematical terms, you essentially square the square. But you can't take a pencil and draw it the way you can the first 3. I know it's got something to do with Einstein and time. I guess maybe you could call it 4th dimension time." "That's right," Charles said. "Good girl." "Okay, for the 5th dimension, you'd square the 5th, wouldn't you'd square the 4th, wouldn't you?" "I guess so." "Well, the 5th dimension's a tesseract. You add that to the other 4 dimensions, and you can travel through space without having to go the long way around. In other words, to put it into Euclid or old-fashioned plain geometry, a straight line is not the shortest distance between 2 points." For a brief, illuminating second, Meg's face had the listening, probing expression that was so often seen on Charles Wallace's face. "I see," she cried. "I got it. For just one whole moment, I got it. I can't possibly explain it now, but for a second, I totally saw it. Did you get it?" She turned excitedly to Calvin. He nodded. Enough. I don't understand it the way Charles Wallace does, but enough to get the general idea. So now we go, Miss Witch said. There is not all the time in the world. Could we hold hands, Meg asked. Calvin took her hand and held it tightly in his. You can try, Miss Whatsit said, though I'm not sure how it will work. You see, we travel together, we travel alone. We will go first and take you afterward in the backwash. That may be a bit easier for you. As she spoke, the great white body began to waver, the wings to dissolve into mist. Mrs. Who seemed to evaporate until there was nothing but her glasses, and then the glasses too disappeared. It reminded Meg of the Cheshire Cat. I've often seen a face without glasses, she thought, but glasses without a face? Huh, I wonder if I'll go that way too. First me, and then my glasses? She looked over at Miss Witch. Mrs. Witch was there until she wasn't. There was a gust of wind and a great gust and a sharp shattering as she was shoved through, well, what exactly? Then darkness, silence, and nothingness. If Calvin was still holding her hand, she certainly couldn't feel it. But this time she was prepared for the sudden and complete dissolution of her body. When she felt the tingling coming back to her fingertips, she knew that the journey was almost over, and she could feel again the pressure of Calvin's hand about hers. Without warning, coming as a complete and unexpected shock, she felt a pressure she had never imagined, as though she were being completely flattened out by an enormous steamroller. This was far worse than the nothingness had been. While she was nothing, there was no need to breathe, but now her lungs were squeezed together so that although she was dying for want of air, there was no way for her lungs to expand and contract to take in the air that she must have to stay alive. This was completely different from the thinning of atmosphere when they flew up the mountain, and she had to put the flowers on her face to breathe. She tried to gasp, but a paper doll can't gasp, you see. She thought she was trying to think, but her flattened out mind was unable to function as her thoughts were squashed along with the rest of her. Her heart tried to beat, but it gave a knife-like sideways movement, but it would not expand. But then she seemed to hear a voice, or if not a voice, at the very least words. Words flattened out like printed words on paper. Oh no, we can't stop here. This is a two-dimensional planet, and the children can't manage here. She was whizzed into nothingness yet again. And nothingness was sort of wonderful. She didn't mind that she couldn't feel Calvin's hand, or that she could not feel or just simply be. The relief from the intolerable pressure was all she needed. When the tingling began to come back into her fingers, her toes, she could feel Calvin holding her tightly. Her heart began to beat regularly, and blood was coursing through her veins again. Whatever it was that had happened, whatever mistake had been made, seemed to be over now. She thought she heard Charles Wallace saying, his words round and full as spoken words ought to be, "Really, Miss Witch, you might have just killed us." This time she was pushed out of the frightening fifth dimension with a sudden and immediate jerk. There she was, herself again, standing with Calvin beside her, holding on to her for dear life. Charles Wallace, who was in front of her, looking indignant. Miss Whatsit, Miss Who, and Miss Witch were not yet visible, but she knew that they were. The fact of their presence was strong about her. Children, I apologize, came Miss Witch's voice. Now, Charles, calm down, Miss Whatsit said, appearing not as the great and beautiful beast she had been when they last saw her, but in her familiar wild garb of shawls and scarves and the old tramp's coat and hat. You know how difficult it is for her to materialize, and if you are not substantial enough yourself, it's very difficult to realize how limiting protoplasm can be. I am sorry, Miss Witch's voice came again, but there was more than a hint of amusement in it. It's not funny. Charles Wallace gave a childish stamp with his foot. Mrs. Who's glasses shone out, and the rest of her slowly appeared behind them. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, she smiled broadly. Prospero in The Tempest. I do love that play. You didn't do it on purpose? Charles demanded. Oh, my darling, of course not, Miss Whatsit said quickly. It was just a very understandable mistake. It's very difficult for Miss Witch to think in a corporeal way. She wouldn't hurt you deliberately, you know that, and it's really a very pleasant little planet, rather amusing to be so flat. We always enjoy our visits there. Where are we now, then? Charles Wallace demanded. And why? In Orion's belt. We have a friend here, and we want you to have a look at your own planet. When are we going home? Meg asked anxiously. What about Mother? What about the twins? They'll be terribly worried about us when we didn't come home at bedtime. Well, Mother must be frantic by now. She and the twins and Fort will have been looking and looking for us, and of course, we aren't anywhere to be found. Now, don't you worry, my pet, Miss Watson said cheerfully. We took care of that before we left. Your mother has had enough to worry about with her and you and Charles to cope with, and not knowing about your father without adding any extra to her anxieties. We took a time wrinkle as well as a space wrinkle. It's very easy to do if you just know how. What do you mean? Meg asked plaintively. Please, Miss Watson, it's all so confusing. Just relax. Don't worry over things that needn't trouble you, Miss Whatsit said. We made a nice, tidy little time tester, and unless something goes horribly wrong, we'll have you back about 5 minutes before you've actually left. So there'll be time to spare, and nobody need ever know that you were gone at all. Though, of course, you'll be telling your mother, the dear lamb, that she is. And if something does go terribly wrong, it won't matter whether we ever get back at all. Don't frighten them, Miss Witch's voice came. Are you losing faith? She asked. Oh, no, not at all. But Meg thought her voice sounded a little faint. I hope this is a nice planet, Calvin said. We can't see much of it. Does it ever clear up? Meg looked around her, realizing she'd been so breathless from the journey and the stop at the two-dimensional planet that she hadn't noticed her surroundings. And perhaps this was not extremely surprising, for the main thing about the surroundings was exactly that they were unnoticeable. They seemed to be standing on some kind of nondescript but very flat surface. Even the air around them was gray. Though it was not, exactly fog, she could see nothing through it. Visibility was limited to the nicely definite bodies of Charles Wallace and Calvin, and the rather unbelievable bodies of Mrs. Whatsit, Miss Who, and the faint occasional glimmer of that was Mrs. Witch. Come, children, Miss Whatsit said. We don't have far to go, and we might as well walk. It will do you good to stretch your legs a bit. As they moved through the grayness, Meg caught an occasional glimpse of slag-like rocks, but there were no traces of trees or bushes, and nothing but flat ground under their feet. No sign of any vegetation at all. Finally, ahead of them, there leaned what seemed to be a hill of stone. As they approached it, Meg could see that there was an entrance that led into a deep and very dark cavern. Are we going in there? She asked nervously. Don't be afraid, Miss Whatsit said. It's easier for the happy medium to work within. Oh, you'll like her, children. She's very jolly. If I ever saw her looking unhappy, I would be incredibly depressed myself. As long as she can laugh, I'm sure everything is going to come out right in the end. Mrs. Whatsit, came Mrs. Voices severely. Just because you are very young is no excuse for talking too much. Miss Whatsit looked hurt, but she subsided. Just how old are you? Calvin asked. Just a moment, Miss Whatsit murmured, and appeared to calculate rapidly upon her fingers. She nodded triumphantly. I am exactly 2,379,152,497 years, 8 months and 3 days. That is according to your calendar, of course, which even you know isn't the most accurate. She leaned closer to Meg and whispered, It really was a very great honor for me to be chosen for this mission. It's just because of my verbalizing and materializing so well, you know. But of course, we can't take any credit for our talents. It's how we use them that counts, and I make far too many mistakes. That's why Miss Who and I enjoyed seeing Miss Witch make a mistake when she tried to land you on a two-dimensional planet. It was that we were laughing at. Not you. She was laughing at herself, you see. She's really terribly nice to us younger ones. Meg was listening with such interest to what Miss Whatsit was saying, she hardly noticed when they had gone into the cave. The transition from the grayness of the outside to the grayness of the inside was almost unnoticeable. She saw a flickering light ahead of them, and down, and it was toward this that they went. As they drew closer, she realized that it was fire. It gets very cold in here. Um, Miss Watts had said, so we asked her to have a good bonfire going for you. As they approached the fire, they could see a dark shadow against it, and they went closer still and could see that the shadow was indeed a woman. She wore a turban of a beautiful pale mauve silk and long flowing purple satin gown. In her hands was a crystal ball, into which she was gazing rapidly. She did not appear to see the children, Miss Whatsit, Miss Who, and Miss Witch, but continued to stare into the crystal ball, as though she stared. And as she stared, she suddenly began to laugh. She laughed and laughed at whatever it was she was seeing. Miss Witch's voice rang out clear and strong, echoing against the walls of the cavern, and the words fell with a sonorous clang. We are here. The woman looked up from the ball, and when she saw them, she got up and she curtsied deeply. Miss Whatsit and Mrs. Who dropped small curtsies in return, and the shimmer seemed to bow, but ever so slightly. Oh, medium dear, Miss Whatsit said. These are the children. Charles Wallace Murray. Charles Wallace bowed. Margaret Murray. Meg felt that if Miss Whatsit and Miss Who curtsied, she ought to also, and so she did, but rather awkwardly. And Calvin O'Keefe. Calvin bobbed his head. We want them to see their home planet, Miss Whatsit said. The medium lost the delighted smile she had worn then. Oh, why must you make me look at unpleasant things when there are so many delightful ones to see? Again, Miss Witch's voice reverberated through the cave. There will no longer be so many pleasant things to look at if responsible people do not do something about the unpleasant ones. The medium sighed and held the ball high. Look, children, she said, Miss Whatsit said, look into it well. Que la terre est petite à qui lève des cieux, Delight. How small is the earth to him who looks from heaven, Mrs. Who intoned musically. Meg looked into the crystal ball, at first with caution, and then with increasing eagerness, as she seemed to see an enormous sweep of dark and empty space, and then galaxies swinging across it. Finally, they seemed to move closer on one of the galaxies. That is your own Milky Way, Miss Whatsit whispered to Meg. They were headed directly towards the center of the galaxy. Then they moved off to one side. Stars seemed to be just rushing beside them. Meg flung her arm up over her face as if to ward off the blow. Look, Miss Witch commanded. Meg dropped her arm. They seemed to be moving in toward a planet. She thought she could make out polar ice caps. Everything seemed so sparkling clear. No, medium dear, that's Mars. Miss Whatsit reproved gently. Do I have to? The medium asked. Now, Miss Witch commanded. The bright planet moved out of their vision, and for a moment there was the darkness of space, then another planet. The outlines of this planet were not clean and clear. It seemed to be covered with a smoky haze. Through the haze, Meg thought she could make out the familiar outlines of continents like pictures in her social studies books. Is it because of our atmosphere that we can't see properly? She asked anxiously. No, Meg. You know that is not the atmosphere, Miss Witch said. You must be brave. It's the thing, Charles Wallace cried. It's that dark thing that we saw from the mountain on the peak on Uriel when we were riding on Miss What's-Its back. Did it just come? Meg asked in agony, unable to take her eyes from the thickness of the shadow that which darkened the beauty of the earth. Did it just come while we were gone? Mrs. Witch's voice seemed very tired. Tell her, she said to Miss Whatsit. Miss Whatsit sighed. No, Meg, it hasn't just come. It has been there for a great many years. That is why your planet is such a troubled one. But why? Calvin started to ask, his voice croaking hoarsely. Miss Whatsit raised her hand to silence him. We showed you the dark thing on Uriel first, oh, for many reasons. First, because the atmosphere on the mountain peaks there is so clear and so thin you could see it for what it was, or what it is. And we thought it would be easier for you to understand if you saw it, well, someplace else first, not your own Earth. I hate it, Charles Wallace cried passionately. I hate that dark thing. Miss Whatsit nodded. Yes, Charles, dear, we all do. That's another reason we wanted to prepare you on Uriel. We thought it would be frightening for you to see it first of all about your own beloved world. But what is it? Calvin demanded. We know that it's evil, but what is it exactly? You have said it, Miss Witch's voice rang out. It is evil. It is the powers of darkness. But what's going to happen? Meg's voice trembled. Oh, please, Miss Witch, tell us what's going to happen. We will continue to fight. Something in Mrs. Witch's voice made all three children stand straighter, throwing back their shoulders with sheer determination, looking at the glimmer that was Miss Witch with pride and confidence. And we're not alone, you know, children, came Miss Whatsit, the comforter. All through the universe, it's being fought, all through the cosmos, and but it's a grand and exciting battle. I know it's hard for you to understand about size, how there's very little difference in the size of the tiniest microbe in the greatest galaxy. You think about that, and maybe it won't seem so strange to you that some of our very best fighters have come right from your own planet. And it's a little planet, dears, out on the edge of the galaxy. You can be so proud that it's been done so well. Who have our fighters been? Calvin asked. Oh, you must know them, dear, Miss Whatsit said, Miss Whose spectacles shone out at them triumphantly, and the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Jesus, Charles Wallace said. Why, of course, Jesus. Come on, Charles, love. There were others, all of your great artists. They have been lights for us to see by. Leonardo da Vinci, Calvin suggested tentatively, and Michelangelo, he also intoned, and Shakespeare, and Bach, and Pasteur, and Madame Curie, and Einstein. Now Calvin's voice rang out with confidence. And Schweitzer, and Gandhi, and Buddha, and Beethoven, and Rembrandt, and St. Francis. Now you, Meg. Oh, Euclid, I suppose. Meg was in such agony of impatience that her voice grated irritably. And Copernicus, and what about Father? Please, what about Father? We are going to your father, Miss Witch said. But where is he? Meg went over to Miss Witch and stomped as though she were as young as Charles Wallace. Miss Whatsit answered in a voice that was low but firm. On a planet that has simply given in, so you must prepare to be very, very strong. All traces of cheer had left the happy medium's face. She sat holding the great ball, looking down at the shadowed earth, and now a tear slowly coursed down her cheek. I can't stand it any longer, she sobbed. Watch now, children, watch.